Hello, this is Tom from LeanMusing.com, and welcome to the 7th video in the Learning to See video series, where we're talking about Tim Wood and the 7 Deadly Wastes. So far we've gone through transportation, inventory, motion, waiting, overprocessing, and we're now up to overproduction, which to many people is considered the worst waste of them all. And obviously they're all bad, but we'll talk about why overproduction is the worst one in a while. And actually, if you're doing some training in your facility or something, this is a good question to ask him at the end of going through Tim Wood. It's kind of funny when you think about it, because it doesn't seem like it's the worst waste, and it seems like to everybody, it's not that big of a deal, but we'll talk about why. So once again, as we do in every video, let's talk about visualizing overproduction for a moment, and what you think of when you hear that term. And what I think of when I hear overproduction is making stuff that you don't need to make, and typically that's either building inventory because someone might order it in the future, or maybe you're trying to get ahead of your orders, and so you're making stuff that's not due until like a month from now that you may have orders for, but you're making them really early just in case, right? And basically running machines that really don't need to be run with labor that doesn't need to be used, and there is the first part of overproduction and why it's a waste. So right away, when you think of overproduction, you know that you're making stuff you don't need for some reason, right? And in doing so, you're tying up machines, you're tying up resources that could be used somewhere else to make whatever things that do need to be made, right? And if you're a big facility, chances are you've got a lot of stuff that needs to be done, and maybe probably overproduction isn't the best way to use them. So I like to tell a little story about what I saw as one of the best examples of overproduction, and how people didn't think it was a bad thing, but how bad it really is. So I was working at a company that made a product where I'm gonna try to keep it general so nobody gets in trouble, I guess. But we made a product where there was a metal part and then there was a paper part to it. So we had to stamp out these paper parts and match them up with these metal parts. And we had different types of paper, and we had different types of metal, of course, and putting them together gave you different products. So one day we had a cell lead who was running the shop, or running the section of the shop that did both of these, and he told the paper blankers to make stuff for the larger part cell. And the reason he told them was because he had parts waiting in the larger cell that needed to be run. I'm sorry, they didn't need to be run. He had people waiting who could have ran these parts if they blanked out the paper. But the best part was these parts weren't due yet, right? They weren't due for like another 2 weeks, but they happened to be ready to the point where he wanted to run them through the cell, and in order to do so, he needed paper. Otherwise, he'd have these guys standing around doing nothing, right? Okay, so that seems like a pretty good reason to have the paper blankers blank the paper parts needed to make those full parts. Now, in doing so, what he didn't realize he was going to do was he used the last bit of paper that was also used for another product. And it was used in another cell right next to the big one. It was for the smaller part cell. And when he did that, he used all the paper for the big parts. So just because he tried to keep some people busy, he ended up using the last of his materials that should have been used on product that needed to be made in the smaller cell, and then the smaller cell was late on those parts. They were due that day, and they could no longer make those parts in time for the trucks that were picking them up that afternoon. So that's a classic example of tying up people and equipment for what seems like the right reasons, right? In just keeping people busy and trying to be efficient. But in doing so, he dropped his on-time delivery percentage. He pissed off a customer who thought they were getting parts that day, and then they had to wait 2 weeks to get the paper back in. I mean, that's how bad it got. And then that 2 weeks they were waiting for that paper, what do you think the big parts were doing? Sitting around, acting as inventory, right? And just not moving anywhere. So they were being transported. We were waiting, and that right there is why overproduction is the worst waste of all of them. It's the only waste that leads to all of the other wastes. So in that example, right, we created inventory. We may have had defects, okay? So we had defects for product that we needed to use and then ended up completely scrapping it out. We had a lot of excess transportation, and I can guarantee that because they were big parts. They were sitting around, and every time you need something behind it, you're moving them around, and yeah, it's just not good. We were waiting. Or did I cover that one already? There's a lot of excess motion in making parts that didn't need to be made, so that's a waste by itself. And by definition, that's over processing. I think, well, maybe not. Maybe that example wouldn't be over processing. It depends on your view of what each waste means. But that's a very simple example that happens very regularly. That was a big deal, and you want to make sure that you are not overproducing if you don't need to be. In doing so, you'll make sure that you're working on the right stuff, and you're getting a better velocity through your plant. And it's going to support your OTD again. And I mean, that's what getting rid of all these wastes is all about. And the guy that did this, right, I talked to him after, and he's like, I just thought I was doing the right thing. And nobody yelled at him, you know. It was kind of like, well, lesson learned, and in the future, that's why we want to make sure we're working on the stuff we're supposed to, and not just running machines and keeping people busy just to keep them busy. It really doesn't do you any favors. If your system's set up to handle the product and the orders that you're getting, it's not a problem. So hopefully that was a good example for you guys in terms of what overproduction is. And in the next video, we're going to be talking about defects, which is the last of the Tim Wood waste. However, I think I'll do one bonus video on top of that. And we'll see you then.